prices would collapse in China, and the Chinese would have a booming economy. That's what awaits them when they stop propping up the dollar. But we've got everybody convinced that, oh no, that the key for the Chinese economy is to export to us. I mean, it's like, how did we get that lucky? That, our role in the global economy is to shop. Everybody else has to work hard and make stuff, and we do them all a favor by taking it off their hands. I don't know, but if we stop shopping, you're done. It's like, you're going to lose all those jobs. Well, what good are those jobs? Right? Again, that's like telling the slaves, hey, if we end slavery, you're out of work. You're unemployed. Well, it's good to be unemployed when you're a slave. So that's, and we did the same thing, we had the wartime economy. I write about this in Crash Proof, that in the Second World War, all of our factories were busy, 3 shifts, making weapons, bombs, all kinds of stuff that exploded. And everybody had jobs because we were producing all this military equipment, but meanwhile, you couldn't buy anything in America during the 40s. Everything there was rationed. Because everything we made was being shipped over to Europe or Japan. We were supporting the troops. Now, when the war ended, our economy didn't collapse because we didn't have any bombs to make. We just started making consumer goods again, and we had a boom after the war. So that's what would happen to China. If they stopped making stuff for us, they just start making stuff for themselves, and that's a better deal for them because that way they get the jobs and they get the stuff. And of course, that's really what you want, right? You don't want the job, you want the stuff, right? That's what Obama's always talking about, creating jobs. And the government could create a lot of jobs. In fact, pretty soon everyone's going to have 2 or 3 jobs. But what good is all that work? Because the government creates work. They don't create purchasing power. Back in the Soviet Union, everybody had a job. But there was no unemployment in the Soviet Union. But you waited online 6 hours for bread. Because nobody was baking bread. Everyone was working for the government. And so if the government gives everybody a job, there's no unemployment, but what good is your job? Because there's nothing to buy. Because production. We want jobs because we want the production associated with those jobs. And in America, we're getting the production associated with everybody else's jobs. That's the problem. The world is working, sending us stuff, and we send them paper. So this is going to come in. And the Chinese, I mean, they're pretty smart, actually. So they're going to figure this out. If I can figure it out, they can figure it out. And they're not going to play this game. And when the Chinese don't play the game, the Koreans aren't going to play the game, the Indians aren't going to play the game, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, all these countries that are just accumulating, warehousing hundreds of billions of dollars. Think about all these sovereign wealth funds. These are giant taxes that are extracted from people who on the surface are a lot poorer than Americans, and they're having to pay this huge tax so that we can keep buying stuff. And when it comes to an end, there's a big collapse in the dollar, their currencies are going to go up, and everything is going to change. What it means to be an American is going to change. We're living a lifestyle based on an illusion, based on a myth. At one point, Americans were the wealthiest people in the world because we deserved it. We produced everything. If you wanted something, we made it. And why did we make everything? Why did we produce everything? Why did we invent everything? Because we had freedom. We were freer. That was our advantage. We had more freedom. We didn't have all the regulations. We didn't have all the taxes. We didn't have all the government that Europe had, that the rest of the world had. And so because we were freer, we were more productive, we produced things, and we created this magnificent living standard. And it's funny, too, because, even some of these Occupy Wall Street protesters, I guess they got educated in government schools, and they're convinced that everybody was broke until the government, the labor unions came in. And that the only people that got rich from capitalism were these few rich people who hoarded all their wealth. And everybody was poor, working in sweatshops until the government came in and passed all these rules and regulations. And that's when we created the middle class. The government didn't create the middle class. Capitalism created the middle class. There were some people that got very rich, but they got very rich by creating the middle class. That's how they got rich. They sold products to people who, before them, there was no products. You know, the whole lifestyle was created by these entrepreneurs back when we had no taxes. You know, people keep talking about the days when income taxes were as high as 70 and 90%. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. But what about when they were zero? Because they were zero for a lot longer than they were 70%. And in fact, when they were 70%, nobody really paid it. That's the whole irony of it all, because there were a lot of loopholes back then. Nobody actually paid 70%. Who would work for 30 cents on the dollar? Not that many people. But it was the absence of government that created this productive economy. We don't have that anymore. We've got as many rules and regulations as any other country, in fact, more so than a lot of countries. We got a lot of government, we got a lot of taxes. And when the credit stops and we can't export paper for stuff, because remember, what does it cost us to print money? It costs us nothing. In fact, we don't even have to print it anymore because it's just electronic, so we save on the ink. But the world, I mean, all the products, I mean, think about probably everything in this auditorium. All those seats, all these lights, whatever's here was all imported. I'm sure this table, this microphone, everything that's here. Probably the carpeting on the floor was imported. I mean, all this stuff. And creating all this stuff, people had to work. I mean, there were factories, there's machines. And then they had to ship it all over here. So a lot of work is done to create the stuff that we import. No work is done to print the money that we export. So we can have a great economy. We don't have to make anything. Right? When everybody just gives you stuff for nothing. So when this changes, this is a dramatic shift. And I don't know really how it's going to all shake out. Because, you know, we could be on the cusp of our own version of a Russian-style Soviet revolution. I mean, you can see the wind blowing in that direction. Fortunately, you've got some winds blowing in the other direction. You've got people, the Tea Party, there is a movement out there of people that understand that our problems are because of government, and government is too big, and government doesn't respect the Constitution, and they want to rein in government. So you have these two forces that are going to come together, but I don't know which one is going to prevail. You know, is it going to be the left that's blaming everything on capitalism, or is it going to be the people who are blaming it on government and who want more capitalism? I don't know, but I do know that things are going to change significantly in the short run. We're going to have a huge decline in our standard of living, because when the dollar collapses, our purchasing power goes. When we can't import, we just have to do without. You know, imagine what would Walmart look like if there were no imported products there? Just be empty shelves. And in fact, eventually, if they put products in there, you'd think we're at Neiman Marcus or Saks Fifth Avenue, because things are going to be really expensive. But you know, as things get expensive here, they're going to get cheaper someplace else. You know, if you look at China, imagine how many more automobiles the Chinese are going to buy if oil prices, gasoline prices come down 70 or 80%, which is what would happen if their currency went up. But of course, the cost of producing those cars, steel prices would come down. All the raw material prices would come down. But if the Chinese started consuming 4 or 5 times as much oil, where's that oil going to come from? Well, it's the oil that we no longer buy, because we can't afford it anymore. Right? What would happen if gasoline was $20 a gallon, $30 a gallon? How many gallons would the typical American buy? Not many. We'd have to start, riding around on those bicycles. Maybe that's one of the things that they can ship over here, because they got a lot of bicycles. They're not going to need them. But we're going to need them, and then, we'll start to sell the Chinese a lot of the stuff that we can no longer afford. It's going to be almost like a giant repossession. I mean, they made the stuff, they're going to get it back eventually. It's just we're going to have to use it for a few years. But a lot of the stuff is going to go back there because we need to sell it, because we need food. We need to pay the electric bills or the heating bills. I mean, that's what's going to happen. I mean, Americans are going to find the majority of their income is just going to go for the basic necessities, because all that stuff is going to cost more. And a lot of people think, well, how can you have this big inflation when the economy is so weak? Well, that's why it's so bad. People always look at the demand side when they're thinking about inflation, and they forget the supply side. When the dollar collapses, the supply of goods collapses. We can't import anymore. And in fact, a lot of the things that we make are exported. And so the prices go up. I mean, what's going to happen? Look at the price of seafood, and this is even kind of an amazing fact. But we import 90% of our seafood. 90%. And we're surrounded by ocean. We got all these lakes. We got to have fish there. We got all these people who are unemployed. They can't pick up a rod and We can't fish. I mean, I guess it's easier just to collect an unemployment check. But what's going to happen to the price of fish when the dollar collapses? I mean, you know. But even the stuff that we grow here, I mean, we're going to export that. Right? The farmers they're going to sell their products in Asia because they can get a lot more money for it. So we're going to start at prices are going to go up. But what we need to do as investors, and what we're trying to do at Europe Pacific, and then I'm not sure what we're talking about. I want to take a lot of questions as best we can. But what we want to do as investors is really brace for this crisis because it's coming. And a lot of people were surprised by what happened in 2008. I mean, people who understood this weren't surprised at all. What surprised me is what took so long. But this real crisis is coming. We bought ourselves a few years of phony recovery, but at great price. And there's no way that we come out of this with the dollar not a lot lower than it is today. Of course, the worst case scenario, it collapses to practically nothing. But even if we do the right things, it's still going to lose value from where it is now, probably a substantial amount of its value. You know, American wages are going to have to fall. You know, why do we have millions of people unemployed? Because labor is too expensive. That's why. I mean, there's no demand for labor because it's too expensive. So labor costs are going to have to come down. Now, it's not all wages that have to come down. It's the labor costs, because a lot of the labor costs are not the wages. It's all the mandated benefits and all the taxes and all the litigation and all the risks that are associated with employing people. A lot of people in this country just don't want to employ anybody. Because why would you? The minute you employ somebody, it's like they draw a target on your back, and there's all kinds of ways they can fine you and sue you. I mean, look at this. Look at the sexual harassment charges now, just against Terman Kane. I mean, you think that how many people want to hire people knowing that they can end up, you know, sexual harassment? I mean, 2 or 3 of these women, they had to pay them $35,000, $45,000 of your year's salary. Who knows if there was actually any sexual harassment? But the employer had to write those checks. You know, just because someone says that, you know, they felt offended based on what somebody said or what some expression or a gesture. Who wants that liability? Who wants to know that anytime they hire somebody, all someone has to do is say, hey, I didn't like something that he said, and you got to write a $45,000 check? You know, I'll just hire workers in another country. I'll outsource my labor, or I'll just use a machine. People are doing whatever they can to avoid hiring. That stuff has to stop. You know, we can't have a situation where the minute you become an employer, all your legal rights go out the window, and you're just, you know, beholden to, you know, any kind of number of crazy different charges that can be leveled against you for who knows what. You know, I remember even not too long ago, I forget which company it was, but the Obama administration filed a lawsuit against them for discrimination. They were hiring a bunch of people, but apparently they said that they were discriminating against blacks. They were hiring. There was like nobody hiring. So here's a company that decides they're going to hire people, and they get sued for it. So what's the message? Don't hire. You want to avoid a lawsuit? Don't hire anybody. Then they can't sue you. Although I think one of the things now in the Obama bill, one of the most recent ones, they want to make it illegal to discriminate against the unemployed. So that if somebody's been unemployed for more than 6 months, right, they said you can't, because there were companies that didn't want people that had been unemployed for a long time. So they were saying, look, if you've been employed for more than a year, 2 years don't apply. I want people that are either still employed or have only been out of the workforce for a short period of time. And you can understand why a company might want to do that, especially in a weak labor market. They want to choose from among the best. And they figure, hey, if you've been unemployed for a couple of years, maybe there's a reason for that. And so let me just try to find somebody that's only been unemployed for a few weeks. But the Obama administration said, well, it's illegal now. You can't discriminate. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if you've been unemployed for more than 6 months, good luck getting an interview. Because why would anybody want to take a risk in an interview? Because if you don't hire you, they can sue you. So I didn't get the job because you discriminated against me because I was unemployed for 7 months. Especially if you end up hiring somebody who was only unemployed for 3 months. I mean, hey, that's a basis for a lawsuit right there. So the best way to guard against the lawsuit is just don't even look at anybody who's been unemployed. But you know, these are the unintended consequences of government regulations. But all this is going to have to come down. The labor costs are going to have to fall. Americans are going to have a much lower standard of living in the future. And anybody who has dollars is going to have a much lower standard of living in the future. And if you've worked a lifetime and you've saved your money, and you've got money in dollars, you've got a pension in dollars, you've got